Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to have you all here. Um, Thank you for taking the time to being part of this event. We have, my name is Dayan Farias. I'm crime prevention criminal justice officer within the Preventing and Responding to Violence Against Children, Women, and Communities. So we're very happy to have you here in this event organized with SONDA and supported by UNODC. In the next hour, we will really want just to bring the reality of survivors, what is actually happening with them, what we need to understand that it needs to be changed, and what potentially could be changed. So that's why the title of this event is Bringing Justice Closer to People. This is what we need, justice made and designed by people. So I would like to begin with the opening remarks in a video, please. So let's begin with a short message from Fernanda Gallo Freschi. She's SONTA's incoming international president for the time period of 2026. I will let her talk.
Distinguished representatives of the United Nations, esteemed speakers, colleagues, and friends. On behalf of Zonta International, I'm honored to welcome you to this side event on bringing justice closer to the people with a particular focus on responses to gender-based violence. For more than 100 years, Zonta International has worked to build a better world for women and girls. Throughout that history, we have learned a fundamental truth. Rights have little meaning if they cannot be exercised, and justice has little value if it remains out of reach. Achieving gender equality under Sustainable Development Goal 5 and promoting peaceful, just, and inclusive societies under Goal 16 are deeply interconnected. Neither can be fully realized while women and girls continue to face barriers in accessing justice and exercising their rights. Too often, they face discrimination, bias, stigma, lack of information, limited access to services or institutions that are not equipped to respond to their needs. For many, especially those belonging to marginalized or vulnerable communities, the path to justice is not only difficult, it can be intimidating, inaccessible, and at times even harmful. Yet, justice systems should be the places of protection, dignity, and trust. A survivor-centered and human rights-oriented approach challenges us to look beyond procedures and institutions and focus on people. It reminds us that every woman and girl who seeks justice deserves to be treated with respect, to be heard without judgment, and to be protected from further harm and participate meaningfully in decisions that affect her own life. Today's discussion will bring together diverse perspectives and experiences from regions and context. We will hear about the realities faced by Indigenous women, survivors of trafficking, women affected by conflict, and members of minorities. While their experiences differ, they share a common message. Barriers to justice are often systemic, and overcoming them requires systemic change. As civil society organizations, governments, international institutions, and community leaders, we share a collective responsibility to ensure that justice systems are accessible, accountable, inclusive, and responsive to the needs of the people. I hope that today's conversations will inspire concrete actions that build confidence in institutions, amplify survivors' voices, and bring justice closer to the people it is meant to serve. Thank you to our distinguished speakers, our partners, all participants for contributing to this important dialogue. I wish you a productive and inspiring event. Thank you.
Thank you, Santa and Fernanda, for these opening remarks. We also want to appreciate all the partners listed in the program and that also part of the event and do this important work of addressing this issue. And I just want to praise a little bit more what she said at the end, and this is a systemic issue. Everything is ingrained in a way that is against gender equality and how we can protect survivors, because it's not based on what the lived experience have been saying. And this is what we want to understand here. We want that this conversation and these speakers bring what it has happened, why it's a matter from history, what we need to recognize, that also want to move to recovery, accountability, what it means accountability, what we need to build to report cases. We need also awareness, much more awareness of what is happening. What are the different types of violence that we have? For example, economic violence that can manifest through many other factorial and very strong violence against women. So without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker, Ms. Kassia Borges Karajá. She is artist, curator, and activist. She's also of MAHKU, the MOVIMENTO dos ARTISTAS HUNIKUIN. Through clay and through her practice, Kassia turns memory, territory, and indigenous presence into spaces of resistance and dignity. And she brings forward perspectives that justice, policy, and public debate too often live outside and out of the table. She makes one distinction: the content shown to Indigenous women is not a matter of culture, but a legacy of colonization. So, Kassia, please go ahead, and I will just make one framing question for you for your intervention. What does justice owe Indigenous women in Brazil? And why does naming the history of colonization matter for getting there? Over to you.
Posso falar quem eu sou? Tá?
Sim, você fala.
Me chamo Kassia.
My name is Kassia.
Sou da etnia Inã.
I'm from the ethnia Inã.
Do Cerrado, Brasil.
From the Cerrado in Brazil.
Sou mulher.
I'm a woman.
Mãe.
Mother.
Avó.
Grandmother.
Artista.
Artist.
Professora.
Professor.
Curadora.
Curator.
E cientista ambiental.
And ambientalist science.
Tenho formação em artes visuais.
I have a formation in visual arts.
Filosofia.
Philosophy.
Ciências do ambiente e sustentabilidade.
And environmental sciences and sustainability.
Mas mesmo com a minha formação,
but even with that formation,
ainda enfrento preconceitos e dificuldades.
I'm always confronted with preconcepts and discriminations.
principalmente no campo profissional
mostly in the professional sector,
e no cerne mais profundo da sociedade civil.
and in the heart of civil society.
Já fui expulsa de um restaurante porque sou indígena.
I've already been thrown out of a restaurant because I'm indigenous,
Principalmente porque sou uma mulher indígena,
mostly because I'm an indigenous woman,
pois temos uma história
because we have a story,
histórica de maltratos
a history of mistreatment
com as mulheres indígenas,
with indigenous women,
desde a colonização.
starting with colonization.
Temos gravados em nossos corpos
We recorded in our bodies
e almas
and in our souls
a violência
the violence,
estrutural
the structural violence
em todos os lugares,
in all places,
seja na aldeia
coming from the communities in the forest
ou na
forest,
cidade.
or in the city.
O que a justiça deve às mulheres indígenas no Brasil
What justice owes to indigenous women in Brazil?
A justiça deve uma reparação histórica
Justice needs to do historical reparation
com nós, mulheres indígenas.
with us, indigenous women.
Precisamos de uma proteção efetiva
We need effective protection
contra a violência.
against violence.
Precisamos de ser representativas
We need political representativity.
e precisamos de colocar fim na invisibilidade étnica.
And we have to put an end to the ethnic invisibility.
Para que isso aconteça, precisamos de exigir uma estrutura que respeite nossas cosmovisões.
And to make that happen, we need structures that respect our cosmovisions.
Isso inclui, inclusive, um atendimento com intérpretes.
And that means that we get translators.
Precisamos de demarcação de terras.
We need demarcation of our territories.
E precisamos de uma garantia dos nossos direitos
And we need the guarantee for our rights,
reprodutivos e sociais.
for the reproductive and social rights.
A justiça deve garantir uma segurança,
Justice has to guarantee safety,
aplicando uma legislação
justice has to apply a legislation
como a Lei Maria da Penha,
legislation as the law Maria da Penha. Talvez você explica, huh? Maria da Penha, also for the originary people, yeah? Lei Maria da... Explica o que é a Lei Maria da Penha.
A Lei Maria da Penha protege a mulher que foi violentada.
The law Maria da Penha protects raped women.
Nos dá o direito de ir à justiça e reclamar por isso.
And gives us the right to go to justice and to ask for our rights.
Essa lei, ela tem que ser colocada nas aldeias.
This law has to be put into the communities, indigenous communities.
Mas tem também que ser traduzidas nas nossas línguas originárias.
But she has to be translated into our original languages.
Para que nós, mulheres,
so that we women,
para que nós, mulheres, consigamos interpretar,
so that we can interpret
e exigir
and ask for
que isso seja, como é que chama isso? Isso seja realizado.
so that we can ask for our rights, that it will be realized.
Mas uma coisa muito importante, mas muito importante mesmo, é o nosso direito à terra.
But one of the main things, most important things, is our right for territory.
Precisamos de demarcação dos nossos
We need
territórios,
to demark our territories.
pois garante a sobrevivência física, cultural e espiritual de nós mulheres.
Because only the territory guarantees survival in a spiritual, practical, and daily life.
Quero ver essas mulheres nos lugares de poder.
I want to see the women in places of power.
Eu vou fazer um adendo agora, porque está tendo no Brasil um projeto, que é um projeto de decreto legislativo.
I want to put a parenthesis now, a very important one, because actually in Brazil, in the parliament, they are trying to put a law in order.
Que é drástico, dramático.
Which is really dramatic.
É uma lei que é contra mesmo as mulheres,
Against women.
Principalmente as mulheres originárias indígenas.
Mostly against indigenous women.
Proibindo
which prohibits
interromper gravidez de estupro.
Which prohibits abortion in case of rape.
Não poder romper uma gravidez fruto de estupro é a pior violência.
If you can't do abortion in case of rape, that's the biggest violence
contra esse corpo que sempre foi violentado e invisibilizado.
Against this body who always has been raped and made invisible.
Muito obrigada, Kassia.
Deus.
Thank you very much, because this intervention just is a good start, because this is just the beginning, right? Recognize what is happening, recognize what law is doing, and what also is going against the rights of the women. And from the recognition of our history is the beginning to access to justice. So thank you for reminding us that there is systematic discrimination, that we need to address it, that we need to recognize it to really build at. And one thing that we need to, and we will go around and around, is because these laws are not built up or created with those who go through the experience, they really take out of the needs and the experiences of the people who are trying to achieve. So thank you, Kassia. I will move to the next speaker, Monica, who is in Zoom. I will just ask you to put your video, please, Monica, the director of Willow International Every Free in Uganda. So Monica Kiemasima, she is the country director of Willow International, a lawyer and a human rights leader with over 14 years of experience. Monica refuses to define a woman, but worst thing that happened to her. She measures success not by service delivered, but the lives change. And she will share with us a beautiful story, but I will ask the guiding question is, what does it really take to move a survivor from surviving to flourishing? Thank you, Monica, for being with us today. It's a pleasure. Over to you. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Yes, and thank you for that kind introduction. Well, when we talk about from surviving to flourishing, the place that we need to start is how we view the woman, the survivor, the girl. And oftentimes when a survivor walks into an institution, whether it is a police station, a prosecutor's office, or social services, the system is designed to extract from them. And so it takes a statement, it documents injuries, it processes the case, but it rarely asks who the person is beyond what happened to them. And what happens within that, it's an efficient structural mechanism but it is built to manage crisis and not to manage the lives of those survivors. So the consequences that survivors are denied are identified by their worst moment. I beg your pardon. Survivors are identified by their worst moment rather than what their potential is or what their future could hold. So when we're trying to look at how best can we support a survivor to move from surviving to flourishing, we encourage that we look at them as an individual, and not just an individual, but as a whole human being who has hopes and aspirations, who has dreams, and who had a life beyond what happened to them that led them to where they are. That led them to where they are. People interacting with survivors need to look past the trauma. They need to look past the trauma and not become over cautious, awkward, or too paternalistic with the survivor, such as to strip them of their humanity. Trauma, yes, has occurred and they are struggling, but that is not who they are. So, for example, if a lady has experienced sexual violence, their whole life should not be reduced to the act of abuse that occurred to them. So we try to make sure that we try to look at what better would look like for them. And here I will share a story of a lady called Anne. Anne was, she came to our program broken, a survivor of human trafficking, but she was much more than that. She was the breadwinner of her family. She was the businesswoman. She was a mother, and she was trying to build a better life for herself. And this made her a target. I'm sorry, I have a little bit of background noise, but it's about to get overcome. Just give me 1 second, please.
Sure, we can give you 1 second, of course.
Okay. There we are. So Annie came to us as a survivor, but what we learned from her was that she was much more than the trauma that brought her into contact with us. She was extremely broken, and we applied it's an evaluation tool. It's a tech tool that helps us determine the well-being of a survivor or of a client in our care. And we learned that what she needed was to be understood. And in being understood is that we would acknowledge what her needs were at an individual level. Oftentimes, as care workers on the ground, we assume that we know everything there is to know about trauma. We know everything there is to know about human psychology and what a person needs. And so we tend to want to dictate what kind of care we provide to a survivor. But with Annie, we took, we listened to what she wanted, and we looked beyond her her physical trauma, her emotional trauma, and focused on what she wanted most. And that was justice to be gotten against the people who had wronged her. And so we followed that track, and we moved with her along her justice journey. We supported her through court, and she was able to succeed in the court proceedings. And what that did for her was actually transform everything about her. Her health improved, her mental well-being stabilized. Before that, she had had several visits to a mental hospital, and all that fell into place. She was able to regain custody of her children, and she was able to start a business. And what that taught us was that if we can look beyond the trauma of a human being and look at them as a whole person and take into consideration what they have experienced, yes, but what their hopes are, what their dreams are, and what better would look like for them, then we move them from a position where they are just surviving in a system and they begin to flourish in their life. This is something that we do using a tool we call the Freedom Life Map. It is a tool, it's a technology-based survivor-centered assessment and care planning tool that we have co-created at Everfree with survivors, such that we design something that works for them, with them, as opposed to just giving what we think is best for them. And since we began using Freedom Life Map in around 2022, we have seen a lot of change. It allows survivors to self-assess their strengths and their needs through 6 broad dimensions of well-being. And it allows us to look at what they aspire to do, what they have gone through, and what lies ahead for them. And through that, we have seen 38% increase in overall well-being for survivors in our care, reduction in vulnerability at a rate of 50%, and 65% higher goal achievement. And we attribute that to the individual care, that the individual aspects that the Freedom Life Map allows us to view a survivor as. And then we move that individualistic care into systemic change. How do we then build systems that can look at a case, at a broad spectrum of problems, and still give you an individually impactful solution? So what Freedom Life Map does is it assesses, the participant self-assesses, and then through that self-assessment, they gain clarity. We have caseworkers there with them to guide them on how best they can understand maybe the assessment and the questions, but it also allows us to provide guided care. We are not looking at a person and saying, this is what you need. We know that you have this challenge, so this is what we're going to give you. We are saying, this is what you have said is important to you. These are your priorities. How best can we support those priorities? And then over a period of time, we are tracking progress. We are tracking progress through, well, there's a baseline assessment, midterm, and then every 6 months after that to see how well a person is doing. And through that, we have seen transformative care. So Freedom Life Map, these are the dimensions, the 6 dimensions: health and basic needs, rights and safety, housing and infrastructure, education, community and connectedness, and mental health and well-being. So it has over 50 questions in altogether in these 6 domains that assess different aspects of this domain so that we can get an accurate picture of how it is that you're doing. I believe I'm quickly running out of time, but essentially that's what Freedom Life Map does. I've already talked about how, we have been able to see the results that we have gotten from Freedom Life Map, but I invite care workers or institutional partners, people who work with vulnerable groups, to treat these groups as whole people as opposed to reducing them to what it is they have experienced, and to measure what matters. And what matters should be essentially what matters to the person, to the recipient of the service, not what matters to a program, to a system, to a service. And then invest in locally led survivor-centered models that can generate data, and also support regional frameworks that can actually put in place such systems. So in conclusion, I would say that while, yes, we say that justice has been delivered, it is something that we really need to build alongside them, understanding what justice looks like to each and everybody, and then trying to deliver it to them in a way that would be impactful to that particular individual. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monica, for this intervention. I think you bring something very unique. That is a case of Annie, who plays many roles, like many of the women here. You are a mother, you are a business entrepreneur, you have goals, dreams, and you can be treated and be trapped by criminal groups, violence. Anybody could be a victim now, more with on technology and digital risk there. But the important part here is to give the options to the survivors to see what they really want, what it will be fulfilling for them, and what it needs to be around them to make this possible, to make come true and make a reality the project of life of everyone, every woman. That means providing mental health and psychosocial support, giving the options to educate themselves, to give the platform to go up and level up in a systemic disadvantaged world for women. So thank you for reminding us that, and all the care that is needed and all the support that is needed to really address this issue. I will continue with Dr. Musa Mohammed Ali. He is Executive Director at African Center for Justice and Peace Studies. He is a human rights lawyer, a conflict resolution specialist who has spent many years pursuing peace and justice for the people of Sudan, including with decision makers at the United Nations and African Union, and who received an All-of-Fame Prize for his courage and critics of human rights crimes. So please, I will give you a question for you to guide us the intervention. When the violence is not over and trust is broken, especially in context of conflict and insecurity, what makes accountability something survivors can actually believe in still? And thank you, Dr. Musa.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm really very much appreciate actually the presence of the participants in this side event. But also at the same time, actually, I'm really very disappointed because out of those 36 participants, only 6 male who were here, and unfortunately 2 of them have left, so remaining with only 4 male participants. So as if we are generalized, even the topics. And this is actually one of the most unfortunate things that actually we need to struggle, to put these things on the right track. Back to your question, when it comes to the situation in Sudan, and here actually I would like to put your question in a very narrow context, because actually when you speak, for example, about justice and accountability for the conflict-related sexual violence, actually we can go even beyond, the context of this event. But however, I would try to make it a bit narrow to address even the conflict-related sexual violence, especially when it comes, for example, to the human trafficking and migrants smuggling, with special focus on women and girls and how actually they suffer through the journey of human trafficking or through the journey of migrant smuggling, and how the access to justice or the barriers for them to have justice that would affect not only the victims and survivors, but even actually the community as a whole. Because even, we cannot differentiate, for example, between the victims as women and girls, and what happened to them, from the broader context of the community, because actually they affect each other equally. Having said that, maybe I can just start with a very brief background about the context in Sudan, because I believe that maybe so many of our participants, they may not have, that background about Sudan and what has happened, especially after the last war of 2023. Geographically speaking, Sudan is located at the major crossroads for both organized and unorganized migration towards the Middle East and also towards the Europe. And this is simple actually because of its location. So it has been like a country of transit. It has been a country of producing migration as itself, and also as a destination, for so many migrants. And due to our statistics, either within Sudan or even for those who have actually flowed from the neighboring countries, actually the majority are women and children, especially, for example, when we speak about conflict situations. Whenever we have any conflict situation, the majority of the victims and survivors are women and children. So within this context, actually, Sudan has brought the attention not only for the regional actors, but even actually for the international ones. Because the crisis in Sudan has been described as one of the most terrible crises for the current century. Because internally, we have more than 13 million internally displaced people. And also similar number, or maybe some millions who have managed to cross the border to the neighboring countries. And Sudan has a neighboring border with more than 6 countries like Libya, Egypt, Chad, Central African Republic, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and even some of them actually has managed to cross beyond even these boundaries to very far. What makes actually the situation a bit harder, and here just back to your question about justice and accountability. To understand the context and who is involved in this human smuggling or human trafficking, actually result would make even the answer for who is going to be held responsible for such violations or such crimes, even a bit much more clear, and also put actually the context in its right situation. They are state actors. They are involved in this human trafficking and human smuggling, and also they are non-state actors. Both of them actually are involved to a certain extent. And even for the state actors, even they are not involved directly in this process of facilitating the migration of the migrants to neighboring countries for a reward or without, but also at the same time, okay, they are those non-state actors who the government itself should be the one who should take the responsibility, for making the rule of law applies in such situation, because responsibility to protect at the first point, it's for the government, whether for the state parties or for the non-state parties. It is the responsibility of the government to ensure that no one, either a Sudanese citizen or a migrant in a transition or whatsoever, he must be protected from the, for the state actors and also for the non-state actors. Unfortunately, this has not happened. And especially after the war of 2023, and that was almost like 3 years ago. So the situation in Sudan, especially when it comes, for example, to the justice system, it has totally or partially collapsed. And this collapse of the justice system actually has given room to the networks of smugglers and traffickers, to exploit such a situation. Because the law enforcement officers, they are not there, especially the police, because actually this is like a civic matter. So the one who takes the responsibility in such a situation, it must be the police forces, because they have, the role of to enforce the law. But immediately after the war has been erupted in Sudan in 2023, there was no any presence for the police. They have fled with the civilians, either within the country or even some of them has crossed the border to other countries. And also this could be applied, to the office of the persecutor and also to the jury. Most of them have fled with their families. They may be an excuse for them, because actually, they are not a military. And this is like a conflict context situation. So everyone is just thinking, just to fled, the place where there are some persecution or the place where they feel insecurity. So they have fled. And then we remain, with this vacuum situation. And the smugglers and the traffickers has exploited this situation. And they become even much more active than before. as I have said from the very beginning, for so many years, Sudan was like one of the major transit countries, especially for the East and Western Africa, to the Mediterranean, to Middle East, and even beyond to Europe. Now the number actually could be like a triple. I mean, like before. With such a situation, you are expecting that actually the government should take some protective and preventive measures. I mean, due to the role, to protect the people. And as I have said also, this has not happened, due to these barriers. So from our perspective as CSOs, and this actually is not our role. I mean, actually the protection, the prevention, as I have said, this actually is the role of the governments at all times. But in so many cases, actually, even the governments, including even the international community, sometimes, they rely on the CSOs to fill their gaps. And also, to cover, their shortcomings. For us, actually, as a Sudanese CSOs, despite the fact that actually, there are some delay, for example, when it comes, for example, to the response to the crisis in Sudan. So actually, we didn't wait, to see either the international community or even the regional community, for example, to come with a solution to our people. So within our very limited resources, we have been doing our best, to provide, the least protective measure for those vulnerable groups. And actually, we did this through different means. And here, I think also it would be very essential to mention that the question of human trafficking and human smuggling, it was not like a major issue in Sudan before the 2023. Even our organization as ACGPS, we have been focusing for the past 20 years on international crimes, but actually not like the transnational crimes, for example, crimes like human smuggling, arms trafficking, drugs, whatsoever. We were just focusing on crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide, these things. But just most recently, and here actually would like to be very thankful, to the Global Initiative and also to the Resilience Fund. We have started our first ever project with this regard, actually just like last year, and that with a mapping, at least actually to understand, the context, how widespread and how systematic, this human smuggling and this human trafficking, and also to what extent women and girls have suffered, from such exploitation and from such violations. And we did a research with that regard. And our findings from that research is the women and girls have suffered from sexual slavery, from forced labor, from forced recruitment into army, among others. I would like to just stop here, and maybe I can come back if you have like any follow-up questions, to address, for example, like what are the next steps that we are planning to do and what we can expect, for example, from the international community, for example, to contribute, to minimize the risk for those vulnerable groups. I will stop here and I will give you the floor back. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mossad. I think two reflections very strong that we need to is, we need to bring men to the table. We need a whole society approach because what we need is a systemic. So let's bring more men into the discussion for sure. That's why we try to bring the two experts to bring also a different angle. We are living in the middle of public crisis and values, as he mentioned. Even the government and state officials actually prompt crime against women and children. So we need to rethink also our values. It's not only about the situation and the system, but what are the values that we want to lead with and lead by? And thank you for bringing also the issue of Sudan. I think we are more connected than ever because of everything. Internet, digital, globalization, transnational organized crime. So we also need to support each other in those who are also part of the suffering and of course contribute what is happening in Sudan. Thank you very much for that intervention. I will continue with Victor Gisti. He is a doctoral candidate in legal studies of the Central Europe University, whose research examines how legal systems that come themselves neutral, in fact, carry the social norms of those who build them. Victor makes a point that is easy to overlook. One of the most serious forms of violence is when a person cannot even register a crime that occurred. And this, of course, falls under, for example, trans women in a country that has ranked at the first in the world for lethal violence against them. So I will give the guiding question is what happens when the system fails someone before they can even report? And who pays the highest price? So thank you, and over. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Diane. I also want to begin by thanking Sabine Peters and Zonta for the invitation. It's a great privilege to be here, and I hope that my contribution can also add to this very important discussion. So I want to draw attention first to this headline here. Oh, okay. Yes. So this headline says basically that in Brazil, according to an NGO research, every 34 hours, an LGBTQI plus person is killed in the country. So the violence that LGBTQI plus people are facing in Brazil is not only expressed through physical aggression, but is also something that reflects institutional barriers. And one of the most overlooked forms of this type of violence happens when we are not able to register the crimes that we are a victim of. So access to justice, I believe, includes being able to access police stations. And if the legal system it refuses recognition at the very first stage, it reproduces what we can call an institutional erasure or institutional neglect. So the victim is present, the harm has occurred, but the system does not recognize it. So legal systems, as Diane already said, usually present themselves as neutral, but they are actually mechanisms that simply apply rules that operate through embedded social norms. So, and these norms also shape how institutions treat people. So when LGBTQI plus people try to report crimes, we repeatedly encounter the same obstacles. For example, re-victimization by officers who question or trivialize our account, discouragement as if the crime was not serious enough to warrant a report, a fear of being outed in the process of seeking protection, and of course, underlying all of this, a deep and ingrained lack of trust between LGBTQI plus communities and police forces and law enforcement in general. And this is not unique to Brazil, of course, since studies from countries such as Canada, Australia, the US show also the same pattern happening, these barriers to accessing and reporting these crimes. So even in jurisdictions, as you can see, with well-developed anti-discrimination frameworks. So therefore, and I think we are addressing this very well today, the gap between formal rights and actual access to justice is the central issue here, since legal recognition is not enough to combat it. Within the LGBT, and can you please move to the next? Okay, yeah. Within the LGBTQI plus community, as Diane mentioned, trans women are the group most disproportionately affected, both by lethal violence and by institutional neglect in Brazil. Brazil consistently records the highest absolute numbers of trans murders in the world. Many of those cases never reach proper investigation. They are misclassified, undocumented, or simply closed by institutions. This is where NGOs become very prevalent. And here I bring the example of ANTRA, which is the biggest organization advocating for the rights of trans people in Brazil. And they produce an annual report on murders and violence against trans people in the country. This report becomes the primary source of data on this type of violence, since the state is not actively and consistently producing and making this data available for us. The failure, of course, to document this is not a bureaucratic oversight, it is a structural, and difficulties in registering produce underreporting, which produce invisibility, which reduces, of course, state accountability. And the violence itself is compounded, of course, by intersections of gender, race, and class. Trans women, for example, who are Black, who are poor, who engage in sex work, face multiple and overlapping forms of vulnerability. civil society has responded to this scenario. And I am bringing you here two examples. The first one in 2020, just after Brazilian Supreme Court criminalized homotransphobia in the country, ANTRA and LBGAT, which is the Brazilian Association of Gays, Bisexuals, Travestis, Transsexuals, and Intersex Persons, published this practical handbook aimed directly at LGBTQI+ people to explain what constitutes homotransphobia according to the Supreme Court's decision, how to document an incident, how to file a police report, what evidence to preserve, and how to seek legal guidance. And it also includes guidance on supporting others through this reporting process. The second document that I am citing here in the same year was produced by a private university in Brazil called FGV in partnership with ANTRA, ABGLT, and HENOSP, which is a national network of LGBT plus public safety operators. So within the police, they have this organization, and this was published as a protocol directed at the police. It instructs these officers on how to properly receive, classify, and handle reports of homotransphobic crimes, addressing precisely this institutional gap that exists between recognition of this crime and then implementation of the law. The protocol's preface, for example, says that even 1 year after this landmark decision by the Brazilian Supreme Court, many states had still not adapted their practices. So the protocol was a direct response to this impasse between these two things. Also, we have even since before this decision, the existence of specialized police stations who are specialized in crimes motivated by a person's gender, race, sexual orientation, and/or gender identity. And of course, these represent an attempt of institutional design that is being made to accommodate and respond to this type of crimes, but their coverage is very uneven, highly concentrated in big urban centers, and dependent, of course, on political will to maintain and staff them. Their existence is positive, but I think the cautionary tale here is that their persistence and the way that they work is still very much dependent on political will and institutional structure. So for the prevention, for what still needs to happen, I think that the Supreme Court is a very clear example of why hate crime legislation alone is insufficient. So because the law changed in a historical decision, but the protocol published just a year after the decision was taken had to acknowledge that implementation and was falling short in a lot of states. So effective prevention requires multiple simultaneous tracks, and I think this is what we're discussing here today as well, because police training is essential, and the protocol directed, as I mentioned, at police forces and the specialized police stations point at the right direction towards this approach, but scaling and continuity of these approaches still remain a very serious challenge. Institutional accountability matters too. As I said, that data collection must improve because NGOs are the ones but taken upon the task to produce this data since the state is not actively doing it. And community outreach, which means sustained structured dialogue between law enforcement and civil society organizations, like it seems, for example, to be happening in Australia, where they have these liaison officers that are specialized and trained to support LGBTQI+ people in reporting crimes. Is not an option. No, this should be also implemented and should be incorporated within institutional design and actions. And on the longer term, I also believe that comprehensive sexuality education has a crucial prevention role as it would reduce stigma, challenge gender stereotypes, and promote inclusion at a societal level. But of course, this is a much more long-term approach. So these two documents that I have described, the handbooks for the victims and the protocol for the police, show that civil society in Brazil is actually taking practically grounded tools to face this impasse between the recognition of homotransphobia and the implementation of these on the ground. But I think a lot still needs to happen. The problem is not, of course, a lack of knowledge of what needs to be done. The problem here is that political will and institutional consistency is very fluctuating in the country. And until that changes, I think LGBTQI+ people, and especially trans women, as I just mentioned, will continue to face a justice system that at its very deep does not recognize us. And as long as this is true, the violence documented in the first headline that I just showed you, which says that every 34 hours a LGBTQI plus person is killed in Brazil, we remain present. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for bringing the gender is more than just women. That is very important to remind. Thank you for bringing the idea of prevention is first. And we need more bottom-up approaches to actually deter this political only will way of working. I will give the floor to our last finalist. Sorry, we will go a little bit over for those who can. We will try. So, okay. 5 minutes over will be okay with everyone. 5 minutes over. So I will give the floor to Tamara, who is co-director of LEFO, the intervention center that they work with trafficked women in Austria since 1999. Human rights lawyer, over to you. And thank you for those who can stay a little bit over.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to wait until my slide opens. Perfect. I just put it in here.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
To press it.
Yeah.
Just have to really. At least that's how it went.
It didn't work for me.
No?
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So I'm the co-director of LEFO IBF, the Intervention Center for Trafficked Women in Austria. We are working in this area for the past more than 25 years. We're working nationwide. We are the only and the first recognized victim protection organization in Austria. We are financed partly by the Interior Ministry as well as the Women's Ministry, and also commissioned by the Justice Ministry to offer psychosocial and legal process support for victims of trafficking and also girls. And all of our services are offered irrespective of the residency or asylum status of the woman in Austria, and irrespective of the fact if she wants to open criminal proceedings in front of the police or not, which is an important service that we have. I will just go very quickly through the slides. So when we talk about principles and how we can live them in practice, we have to be aware of which principles are we talking about. So the main victims' rights are, in our practice, the access to reflection, the recovery period, which in Austria is not perfectly done because it is actually not implemented into national law, but is rather based on an administrative line that the Interior Ministry uses. So it's not a claim that a victim of trafficking can actually make in front of the court. And this is a lack of protection that we see in our everyday work. Another thing is the compensation, the healthcare and social support, the non-punishment, the psychosocial and legal process support, and the residency. I will talk about that a little bit more in detail. So when we talk about a human rights-based approach, we have to see it holistically. A human rights-based approach is also has to always have a gender-sensitive perspective. Otherwise, we cannot help girls and women who have been trafficked. Important is that human rights principles that might be implemented into international documents such as the UN or the European Convention are perfect that we have them. But what really helps in practice for a victim of trafficking is if this human rights principle is actually also set into national law. Otherwise, the victim cannot make the claim in front of a national court. And it's always a form of negotiation. And we're always, as a victims organization, we're dependent on the political will of each government. When we have an implementation into national law, we are independent of this political will, even if the government changes. So every time that we make our statements in front of stakeholders, state stakeholders, or ministries, we make sure that we mention the human rights principles, that we are uncomfortable when we talk about them, that we are persistent, so that one day some of those human rights principles make it into international law in Austria, because what we have at the moment is not holistic and it's not enough for victims of trafficking. What we need is, of course, survivor-centered and trauma-informed support. We do that through through our social-cultural mediation that we have. We are a migrant organization, so we make sure that we have this perspective covered. We work mostly with women because women mostly want to be helped if they have survived sexual exploitation. It is very important that they do not that they have contact with women if they wish so. Another thing is that we respect the autonomy and we give all the grounds of information that a woman might need to make her own decision. We never, as a victims organization, give a woman the decision that she has to take. She makes the decision on her own terms, and she can always also decide if, for whatever reason, the whole process is too difficult for her. She can also always decide if she wants to return voluntarily back to the country of origin. And even there, we still have long-term support for the woman. We have cooperations with other sister organizations in country of origins. And so we make sure that the survivors that we work with are not passive recipients of our assistance, but they are right holders themselves. They are their own decision makers, and we want them to find back into their own autonomous life. When we talk about the support and help that we offer for victims of trafficking, for women and girls, we have to make sure that we even get access to those women. One of the most important things is, of course, early identification. We have cooperations with the police, with other NGOs, mainly asylum institutions that might encounter presumed victims of trafficking. We have an online outreach program where we try to also reach, for example, people who work in domestic care work, because they most likely will not be informed about their rights here in Austria, and also care workers, household workers in diplomatic households. And we have a 24/7 reachability and crisis intervention if a client of ours needs that, but also if the police has, for example, interrogated a woman, has met a woman in the night, they can call us 24/7, even on the weekends, on free days, and we make it happen that the woman gets our support. We also offer, like I said, legal and psychosocial process support. This means that when a woman, before she's being interrogated by the police, she has the right to have us as a victims organization by her side, so she's not alone with the police, and we can also get her a lawyer. So she always has, through every step, a lawyer that helps her throughout the way. And another thing is we make it happen that the women can access one of our safe shelters. We have 4 safe shelters in Austria. And when a woman, very often when they come from sexual exploitation, they have need of medical care. Sometimes, for example, there's unwanted pregnancies. So they need very, very urgently medical care. And all international documents say that the medical care has to be granted before criminal proceedings are opened, during them and after them. The before is a problem in Austria. It's not very easy to get all access for not insured people, for not insured women in Austria, but through NGO cooperations with doctors, we try to make it happen every time. Then the reflection and recovery period, as I said, it's not perfectly in Austria because the main shortcoming is that's not part of Austrian law. Without that, it is always hard for a woman to stabilize in the first place. If she's not stable, she will not be able to make her informed decision. So this is something that we're really, really advocating for. And then when we talk about residence permits for victims of trafficking, in Austria, there's one special protection title for victims of trafficking, but the shortcoming of it is that it is linked to a criminal investigation. If the victim of trafficking does not want to open an investigation because, for example, she has family members back in her home country and she's afraid of the criminal organization, she will not be granted that title. She can only hope that she might have grants to have an asylum title or subsidiary protection, which at the moment is not easy according to Austrian jurisprudence, but she can try to do so. And we, as a victims organization, we always advocate to leave out this link between criminal investigation and the special protection title. Yes, I talked about legal and psychosocial process support already. Another important right is access to compensation. Access to compensation is a very important tool for victims of trafficking because they have most likely have been exploited. They did not receive any compensation, and this gives a little bit of money and also dignity back to the victim of trafficking. So our key message here is that protection is only effective if the victims can exercise their rights. If they can't, we can only always hope that the political will is there, and we should not do that for the victims of trafficking. I go a bit quicker.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
okay.
just need to
yeah, I will just close up. We do also other protection measures such as education courses, employment support, safe, independent, safe housing after the protection shelter. And I also had some slide about our countries of origins. Most likely, our most countries of origins are Nigeria, Colombia. And we get most of our contacts through the police, so we have a very good cooperations with the police, although we don't work independently of them. And our most common form of exploitation is still the sexual exploitation, and this is also what it is worldwide. This is all of our services that we offer, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry for rushing up. It's just another event coming up. Very important, all the practical work that you do, and justice needs to be addressed from different ends. I would just give the floor to Christiana just to say goodbye to everyone. Thank you very much for your presence, for being over, for your attention, and please talk to other. And if you have questions, you can come to us, and we will try to address stuff.
Thank you very much for the fantastic presentations. And I would just say for all of us, when we go home, we should think, what if we are a survivor? How would we want people interacting with us? And so I think we should do with the survivors that are around in our lives. Thank you.